all we've seen is white women's desire to access patriarchy while wearing girl boss hoops and nurturing an unseeming addiction to Nutella. Welcome to Wine and Chill, your home for all things legal shenanigans. I'm Stephanie, your friendly neighborhood lawyer. Well, if you're new here, not your lawyer, which brings me quickly to our disclaimer. By watching this video, you understand and acknowledge that this video is solely for entertainment purposes, and you agree to have read the full disclaimer down below in the description box. Usually, we talk about lawsuits, civil lawsuits. Every once in a while, we delve into the criminal, and today is one of those days. For those of you that don't know, I'm a former entertainment lawyer turned tech attorney, worked in tech for many moons. Specifically, 5 tech startups, working full-time as an attorney, 2 legal internships. So I've seen it all, from Series A to an almost exit with a company who now has a TV series in the works for its epic blow-up. This case has piqued my interest for the last few years. We are going to talk about a one Miss Elizabeth Holmes and Theranos. Not to be confused with Thanos, but also equally foolish. And in following this case for years, I've noticed that there is a missing thread. A lot of the reporting being done is from people who do not work in the tech industry. We're going to take a nuanced look at the criminal trial that is currently going on and how VC and startup land actually works. Let's do a little primer on Elizabeth Holmes and Theranos. Elizabeth Holmes attended Stanford, and at the ripe age of 19, she decided that she was smarter than her medical and biology professors, and she was going to start a startup. A startup to which they told her the product could not scientifically work. So she founded Theranos. Theranos was touted to be the next new blood testing technology, so large in fact that it was going to end the current way that blood is drawn. So Theranos created this product called Edison, a cute little box which would test drops of your blood. Currently, when you go to the doctor, they put a giant scary syringe into your arm, withdraw a vial of blood, if not more, to test you for things like HIVs, STIs, if your cholesterol is good, if you've eaten too much cake, etc. Miss Holmes and Theranos decided to claim that they could do all of this with a pinprick. Yes, a tiny prick on your finger, couple drops, into Edison it went, and boom, all of your fears about getting your blood drawn should be gone. Yeah, it didn't really play out like that because there was one giant ass problem. Her product never worked, never could work, never did work, it does not work in today's current timeline. Multiple key employees told Elizabeth that the technology didn't work, that they had run numerous labs and had come to the conclusion that, hey, Edison, he's not really there. Scientists and lab directors specifically told Elizabeth, hey, this Walgreens rollout, aka putting Edison in Walgreens for regular people to use, is a bad idea. It's unethical. We shouldn't do it. To which Elizabeth went forward with her plan anyway and rolled out the Theranos product, Edison, into multiple Walgreens and other drugstores. Former lab director Dr. Adam Rosendorf testified just last week that he was never told of a soft launch of the product. It was always a full rollout, to which he was adamantly against, to which he complained and voiced his concern numerous times, to which he then left the company. We're going to get more into the trial proceedings in a little bit. One thing to note that I thought was interesting, while Theranos is being touted as Silicon Valley scandal, Theranos is not quite like the other girls. For instance, the board of Theranos boasts a lot of very interesting members. So a board of directors in a tech startup usually is comprised of one representative from each VC, each venture capital firm that funded the startup. Okay, makes sense. They pay the money, they get a seat at the table. Usually the founder, okay, makes sense. And then 1 or 2 parties who have a specific knowledge of the actual industry, the product. So for example, this is biotech. Somebody with knowledge would be, somebody with a biology degree, PhD preferably. This board had a bunch of seemingly random powerful white men, on it including 2 former US Secretary of States, as well as the former director of the CDC, and even a Senate Majority Leader. How strange. Speaking of key individuals, the co-defendant listed in the indictment was Theranos' COO, Sunny, and Elizabeth's former lover. She's now since engaged and has had a child with her new beau, so it's a little complicated, I guess. So what exactly are Elizabeth and Sunny, which we're not really going to spend much time on him, getting charged with? Well, 9 counts of wire fraud and 2 counts of conspiracy to commit wire fraud. There's no count, however, of any medical fraud. I think they should tack that one on. Prosecutors are alleging she defrauded two distinct sets of people. One being the VCs and two being the patients that use her product and then had false positives, false negatives, all types of havoc wreaked on their healthcare. Before we get into the alleged fraud, let's talk about how startup land and VC funding actually works. VC stands for venture capital. If you're not familiar, venture capital is known for investing in basically risky investments, mostly in startups. These investments are high risk and high reward. High risk as in the startup can make $0 and you lose all your money. High reward as in your startup can turn into Google. It's very much a roll of the dice. VC props up everything. VC props up any type of startup that they're interested in, whether it be a widget, a fidget spinner, your latest Candy Crush app, all the way to Uber, which has yet to become profitable. Speaking of profitability, most startups actually are not profitable, will never be profitable, which is why VCs do spray and pray. They invest in a lot of startups with the hopes that a handful of the hundreds of startups they invested in will actually make money. If they 10x their return on 5, then the rest of the 90 can just fail. And that's usually what happens. So who invested in Theranos? Who are the VC investor victims of Theranos? The Walton family, the owners of Walmart, invested around $100 million. Rupert Murdoch, repugnant owner of the Fox Corporation, invested $121 million. Betsy DeVos and fam invested $120 million. That's the former Secretary of Education who basically ruined public school education. Ciao. Are you seeing a trend of not so reputable people investing in this company? Interesting. So in VC, there's no guarantee of return. A return comes in the form of an exit. There are generally three types of exit, if we're being technical. Acquisition, mergers, which mergers sometimes get classified as acquisitions as well, just when two companies come together. An acquisition, a merger, and an IPO. There are different versions of IPO now. You can do a SPAC, you can do all these things. We'll just lump them all together as an IPO. When these events happen, the VC shares in the startup become liquid, and then the VC recoups their funds. So most of the companies are going to fail. They need a couple big winners. If you invested in Uber and 50 startups that actually failed, it wouldn't matter because Uber is worth so much money. Now, valuation goes hand in hand with the funding piece. So valuation is more of a suggested number than an actual fact. The higher the valuation, the more valuable the startup is. In a publicly traded company, the valuation is simple. How many shares there are multiplied by the cost of the share. Very simple. However, in a startup, valuation is not an exact science. Basically an estimate of how much funding you have by a multiplier of future, aka unforeseen cash flow, is estimated to then arrive to a valuation. It's more so an educated guess. So one of the variables in startup valuation is the funding. How much money has the startup raised? So how does VC funding technically work? So technically you have pre-seed, it's usually friends and family round, then the seed round, then series A, B, C, follow the alphabet until you exit. Okay, so pre-seed round, often known as the friend and families round, is exactly like the title says, when rich friends and family give the startup, who generally is a white man, some money, aka rich people funding other rich people. Next comes the seed round. Elizabeth's childhood neighbor, VC Tim Draper, who is still her #1 fan, led Theranos' seed round to the tune of $500,000. Dispel this notion from your mind that Elizabeth Holmes was ever some girl next door, pull herself up by the bootstraps type of gal. After the seed round, you have Series A. Series A is usually the hardest to raise because by then you need to show proof of concept and sales. Usually a lot of startups die between seed and Series A. If you make it to Series B, usually you're pretty good. I've seen shit fail after that, but listen. According to Crunchbase, Theranos raised approximately 10 rounds of financing. Some debt financing, some VC funding, even private equity. Now, at its height, Theranos was valued at $9 billion. Theranos today is defunct. A little sidestep, but to note, this is Elizabeth's first criminal trial. However, this is not Liz's first go-around with the court system. In 2018, the SEC launched a complaint against Elizabeth and her co-conspirator Sonny. The complaint alleged that she knowingly defrauded investors of $700 million. So from the SEC website, the complaints further charge that Theranos, Holmes, and Balwani is Sonny, claimed that Theranos' products were deployed by the U.S. Department of Defense on the battlefield in Afghanistan and on medevac helicopters, and that the company would generate more than $100 million in revenue in 2014. In truth, Theranos' technology was never deployed by the US Department of Defense and generated a little more than $100,000 in revenue from operations in 2014. Woo, the boldness! Guess how much money Elizabeth paid in her settlement to the SEC? For an alleged $700 million fraud, Elizabeth paid a $500,000 penalty. I wish I could get that kind of discount on my student loans. Brings the question, why would a VC and a smart investor give her $700 million if the revenue for her company in 2014 was a paltry $100,000? Well, we'd have to go into the psychology of who gets money in VC and who doesn't. According to Crunchbase, which is a leading tech source for funding statistics and data, VC funding overwhelmingly goes to white and Asian men. Teams with at least one female founder receive a small 11% of the total pie of the funding. So the 90% of this is going to white and Asian men. Okay. Only a paltry 2.3% of VC funds go to women-led startups, 2% goes to Latinx founders, and only 1% of funds goes to Black-led startups, with 40% of that 1%, 0.04% basically, being Black women, which is diametrically opposed to the statistics that Black women are starting companies at the highest rate in America than any other demographic. But yet Black women receive little to no funding. Little to no, as in only 93 Black women have ever raised more than $1 million for their startup, compared to the tens of thousands of white men. Meanwhile, the average Series A funding is $8 million. Most white founders go on to raise tens of millions of dollars if they get to Series B. And as a reminder, Miss Holmes herself, the epitome of white girl boss, raised a whopping $700 million. Unbeknownst to some people that work outside of tech, but really a glaring, uncomfortable truth in tech, white women are often touted around startup land as signs of progress. From Rent the Runway to the infamous and problematic CEO of Away, white women have been pushed into the startup land limelight as the bastions of equality and diversity. It's giving Rachel Dolezal, but I digress. While startup land is fudging their diversity numbers and pretending they've reached equality by using white women, all we've seen is white women's desire to access patriarchy while wearing girl boss hoops and nurturing an unseeming addiction to Nutella. The second group that was harmed by Elizabeth's alleged actions were the actual patients, the people that used her services, used the Edison, and received false tests. The patients are the true victims, the patients that were diagnosed with diseases they didn't have, then received treatment for diseases they never had, or didn't receive treatment when they should have received treatment because Edison didn't know left from right. All of the testing was housed in a database that Theranos had, but apparently, according to the prosecution, and they're having witnesses testify to state that they were told 2018 to destroy the database. And the prosecution, unfortunately, has lost the encryption key to their copy of the database, so the database is lost. Ciao. We don't need Scooby-Doo to solve this mystery. This is not just some rich person getting richer quicker. Miss Ma'am was out here making fake billions and harming regular people in the process. Which brings us to her trial. The prosecution was originally basing their strategy on that database, which I told you the database kind of got lost, someone erased it, child. So Liz and team basically are now using the defense that, hey, you cannot allow all of these alleged patients to testify. Their anecdotal evidence is unnecessary, like we really need the database, but nobody can find the database. And also key part of her defense is that Sonny coerced her. Girl, you started this company at 19 without Sonny. The product does not work. For fraud, you have to show intent to deceive. The one big glaring help in her case is that yes, startup founders do embellish. Yes, these VCs have given white founders millions, hundreds of millions of dollars sometimes, over literal PowerPoint presentations. However, the large difference with Elizabeth Holmes in her case and other embellishing startup founders is this is biotech. This is not some Candy Crush knockoff. The only path forward I really see is if the prosecution focuses on the patients, the real victim, the people whose lives have been turned upside down by a privileged, enabled, elite narcissist. Because it's too comical not to mention, Elizabeth's future father-in-law showed up at her trial last month to support her. In all of his 61 years of age, he decided to tell the press that he was Hanson. Yeah, I guess he was trying to be incognito, but he could have just said he was some man in the neighborhood. Sir, if you don't go home and drink some milk, this trial is likely going to last for months as there are 200 witnesses being called to the stand. However, there have been a lot of hiccups in the trial, outside of Paw coming in pretending to be handsome. Last week, a juror was dismissed because they decided the trial was giving them anxiety. Told the judge and the rest of the jury that as a Buddhist, they felt morally compelled to leave the trial. That they were worried about Elizabeth's future and they would feel bad personally if Elizabeth were to be in jail while they were out. We're 5 weeks into the trial. So then alternate juror number 2 was then called. Alternate juror number 2 voiced similar concerns, minus the Buddhism, stating that they felt very worried about Elizabeth's future. What if they didn't make the right decision? Juror number 2 also stated and reminded the judge English was not their first language, so they felt uncomfortable and felt put on the spot, and they were unsure that they could follow everything. Y'all out here traumatizing poor immigrants who are trying to mind their business. Juror number 2 was then given a rousing speech about equality in the fake melting pot of America, and basically, kind of pushed into staying. So yes, we now have a juror who says they are worried about Elizabeth's future in the jury. To note, there's only 3 alternate jurors left, so we'll see how many people actually leave during the course of this. What I find so interesting is the jurors' very compassionate approach to Elizabeth and her future. Rhetorical question. I wonder why it's so hard for America to lock up a young white woman, but not, you know what? Never mind. On that note, if you haven't already, please go ahead and like and subscribe. And let me know, do you think Elizabeth Holmes will actually be sentenced to any of the 20 years that she is facing?